They thought cutting a black girl's hair would be the highlight of their pathetic little day. But they had no idea her father was a federal judge who doesn't just punish crimes, he buries them. In a hallway full of cowards, Amira walked in alone. But the moment those scissors touched her braids, the entire balance of power shattered. What started as a harmless prank spiraled into the biggest reckoning Brenton High had ever seen. And trust me, the ending will make your jaw drop. The first bell had barely finished echoing when the atmosphere inside Brenton High shifted, subtly at first, like a whisper passing through the walls, then sharply, like a cold wind cutting through warm air. Backpacks rustled, locker doors slammed, sneakers squeaked across the polished floor. But for a moment every movement stuttered, not because the hallway grew quieter, but because she stepped in. Amira Cole held her schedule close to her chest, her fingers tightening slightly as she crossed the threshold. Her braids, long, neat, and adorned with ocean blue beads, moved gently with each step, catching the overhead light like polished stone. It should have been just another first day for a transfer student. But Brenton High had a habit of deciding who belonged before you even spoke a word. And the moment Amira walked in, the verdict was clear. They decided she didn't. Whispers rippled first, a soft, scattered murmur that spread like wildfire. "Who's that? New girl? Where's she from? Look at her hair. Wow." Some stared with curiosity. More stared with annoyance. A few with the kind of look that said you're already a problem. But Amira kept her pace steady, shoulders straight, eyes focused forward. She had promised herself on the drive to school that she would survive this day quietly, invisibly if possible. No attention, no drama, no repeating the chaos of her last school. But Brenton High had never been a place that allowed invisibility. From the far end of the hallway, leaning against a row of spotless navy blue lockers like he owned the building, Graham Voss lifted his eyes. Captain of the basketball team, son of Brenton's wealthiest family, and proud tyrant of the hallways. He caught sight of Amira and froze, not in admiration, but in calculation. A slow, amused smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. A new one, he thought, finally. He straightened slightly, studying her the way a predator studies the first stumble of prey. Around him his friends kept talking, laughing, unaware that Graham's attention had already locked onto something far more interesting. Near Amira, 3 girls huddled together, pretending to fix their makeup in a locker mirror, while their eyes flicked repeatedly toward her braids. "She's trying too hard," one whispered. "Those beads are so loud," another scoffed. "She's definitely not from here." Their words weren't loud, but they were meant to be heard. Meant to sting, meant to plant seeds. Yet Amira simply adjusted the strap of her backpack and kept walking, choosing silence over reaction. Silence, she had learned, protected you more than anger ever did. But to Graham Voss, silence was the most tempting weakness. Then came the hook. The moment everything changed. A boy rushing past muttered just loud enough for Graham to catch. "That's the judge's daughter, right? The new one in town?" Judge. The words snapped into Graham's mind like a metal trap clicking shut. He didn't know details, didn't know the position, didn't know the power attached to the title, but he didn't care. All he heard was, "important family, someone worth breaking." Across the hall, Amira kept her head low, praying no one would make the connection. She hated the way her father's job followed her like a shadow, how people either feared her or targeted her for it. She had hoped, foolishly, that Brenton High wouldn't know, that she could enter quietly. But her attempt to hide had done the opposite. Mystery was bait, and predators always chased what they couldn't immediately understand. Graham watched her disappear around a corner, feeling the first spark of cruel curiosity ignite inside him. Let's see what makes the judge's daughter break. And as Amira turned into her first class, unaware of the eyes locked on her back, one truth settled quietly in the hallway. The storm had already chosen its target. Amira didn't yet know that the very thing she tried to hide would be the force dragging her straight into the center of a coming storm. The moment Amira stepped into her first period English class, the room felt too bright. Sunlight spilling across rows of desks, dust drifting in quiet spirals, the faint smell of old books clinging to the air. Conversations hummed, chairs scraped, and students glanced at her the way people glance at a sudden interruption. Ms. Langford, a thin woman with a soft voice and perpetually tired eyes, looked up from her attendance sheet. "Oh, class, we have a new student today," she said with a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Would you like to introduce yourself?" Dozens of faces turned, some curious, some amused, some already dismissive. Amira inhaled slowly, a steadying breath that carried the weight of too many first days at too many schools. She stepped forward, voice calm. "My name is Amira Cole. Before she could finish, a sharp, exaggerated laugh cut across the room. It came from Ryder Hale, slouched in the back with his feet propped on a desk, sunglasses perched arrogantly on his head, even indoors. He mimicked her tone, stretching her words in a mocking, distorted accent. "My name is Amira," he snorted, loud enough for the entire class to hear. A ripple of laughter followed, quiet at first, then growing bolder as more students joined in. Julio, seated 2 rows away, quickly lifted his phone and angled it toward Amira, recording her reaction with the excited shimmer of someone capturing content for the group chat. Amira's chest tightened, not with fear, she'd felt this before, but with disappointment. She blinked slowly, refusing to look away or shrink, but the cruelty wasn't finished. From behind her, something small and sharp flicked into her hair. A wadded piece of paper, then another, then another. Mason Trent, broad-shouldered, smirking, leaning back like the classroom belonged to him, whispered, just loud enough, "Damn, girl, why's your hair so long? Trying to sweep the floor with it?" Julio snickered behind his phone. Ryder howled again. The room laughed. "And Miss Langford," she froze, eyes flicking to the scene for a brief second, just long enough to understand exactly what was happening, and then she looked away. No reprimand, no warning, no intervention, just silence. A silence that meant, deal with it yourself. The paper lodged in Amira's braids crinkled against her neck, the beads clicking faintly. She felt her pulse warming, rising, not in anger, but in clarity. If she stayed silent now, they would own her silence forever, so she stepped forward. "My name is Amira Cole," she repeated, her tone calm but sharpened with precision. "But if mispronouncing it makes your day feel more important, go ahead. Everyone needs a hobby." The room fell still. A few mouths dropped open. Ryder's smirk twitched. Mason stopped mid-laugh. Even Julio lowered his phone for a moment, eyebrows lifting as if he couldn't believe she dared speak. Amira continued, voice steady. "And if you're going to throw things at me, at least aim better. It's embarrassing for all of us." A stunned silence swept across the room, a silence so thick it felt like a vacuum had swallowed the noise. Half the class stared at her with a mix of awe and disbelief. No new student had ever talked back to Mason, Ryder, or Julio, not on day one, not ever. Mason clenched his jaw. Ryder dropped his feet to the floor. Julio's eyes narrowed and he angled his phone upward again, not to film amusement this time, but to capture a threat. Amira sat down, head high, refusing to show even a crack in her calm facade. But across the room, the 3 boys exchanged a look, a silent agreement. A promise. She had bruised their pride, and boys like them didn't let that go. One small sentence, sharp, honest, necessary, became the spark. A spark that would ignite a far darker chase than Amira could ever imagine. By mid-morning, the second-floor hallway of Brenton High buzzed with restless energy. Lockers clanging open, conversations crashing into one another, the chaotic heartbeat of a school between classes. Amira hoped she could slip through unnoticed, just another student trying to get to her locker. But hope was something Brenton High never let her keep for long. As she rounded the corner, the crowd shifted, not parting for her, but freezing around a single figure standing in the middle of the hall, Graham Voss, tall, confident, untouchable. His posture oozed authority, the kind handed down through money, reputation, and the unspoken rule that no one challenged a Voss and walked away unscathed. And today he was waiting. Amira slowed, pulse steady but alert. She didn't want trouble, not on her first day, not ever again. But Graham stepped directly into her path, blocking her with the casual cruelty of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "Well, well," he drawled, eyes sweeping over her with unsettling amusement. The new girl with the ocean beads, Mason, Ryder, and Julio, appeared behind him like shadows sliding into place. Students gathered at a distance, forming an unspoken ring around them, not close enough to help, but close enough to watch. Graham's smile never reached his eyes. "So, Amira," he said slowly, as if tasting the name, "you gonna tell us why you're here? Why you transferred? Or should I guess?" Amira clutched her books a little tighter, but kept her expression neutral. "I'm trying to get to class." Graham chuckled, leaning in. "That's not what I asked." His voice lowered, becoming colder. "I heard your dad's someone important, a judge, right?" A pause. "No, something bigger?" Her stomach tightened, not in fear, but in irritation. The very thing she tried to avoid was now the hook sinking deeper. "I don't talk about my family," she replied quietly, stepping to the side. He stepped with her, blocking her again. "But I like talking," he insisted, eyes narrowing. "Especially when people think they're too good to answer me." Ryder snickered. Mason cracked his knuckles for show. Julio lifted his phone, subtle, seamless, starting to record. Amira exhaled softly. "Please move." And that was the moment Graham shifted, ever so slightly, from amused to annoyed. He reached out, fingers curling around the end of one of her braids. He didn't yank, not yet. He just lifted it, testing the boundary, the way a child tests a dangerous animal to see how far he can go. "You know," he murmured, twirling the braid between two fingers, "this hair is loud, like it wants attention. Is that it? Are you trying to get noticed?" Gasps rippled through the watchers. Amira froze, not because of fear, but because of the disrespect that crawled across her skin like fire. She didn't jerk away. She didn't snap. She simply straightened her spine and looked him dead in the eye. "Let go," she said softly, firmly. Her composure should have disarmed him. Instead, it infuriated him. Graham scoffed. "Or what? You gonna cry? Run to Daddy the judge?" Mason laughed. Ryder echoed it. Julio zoomed in with his phone, capturing every second. But Amira didn't break, didn't flinch, didn't bow. And that quiet resistance, the refusal to give him the reaction he wanted, was the spark that ignited something darker inside Graham Voss. He let her braid slip from his hand, but the smirk remained carved on his face. "This is just the beginning," he said softly, almost too calmly. "I always finish what I start." Behind him, Julio slipped his phone into his pocket, a satisfied glint in his eyes. He had captured it. The moment Graham touched her hair. The moment that would soon be twisted, edited, weaponized. A digital knife waiting to be used. This was only the opening move, and Graham had no idea he had just crossed into territory he should have never touched. The boys' bathroom on the first floor of Brenton High was usually a place of noise, slamming doors, trash talk, sneakers screeching across tile. But today the room was strangely quiet, its flickering lights casting broken shadows against the walls. Inside, the four boys gathered like conspirators. Graham stood in front of the mirror, jaw clenched, replaying the earlier hallway encounter in his mind. The image of Amira looking him straight in the eyes, calm, unbroken, unafraid, gnawed at his pride like acid. No one did that to him. No one ever had. Mason kicked open a bathroom stall with his boot, then returned holding something wrapped in a white cloth. He grinned as he unrolled it on the sink counter, a pair of industrial fabric scissors, thick, sharp, cold, the kind used in the school's fashion and textile lab. "These babies cut denim like butter," Mason said proudly. "Imagine what they'll do to—" "We're not shaving her head," Graham cut in, though the smirk on his face said he wasn't entirely opposed to the idea. "Just a little snip, something dramatic, something the whole school will remember." Ryder laughed. "Bro, she's gonna lose her mind when you slice one of those giant braids." Julio leaned against the tiled wall, phone spinning around his finger. "I can get it all on video. Different angles, slow motion, whatever we want. It'll go viral on campus in minutes." He tapped his screen. "Title: New Girl Screams Like a Baby. Boom, instant entertainment." Mason cracked his knuckles. "She deserves it for mouthing off in class. Did you see the look she gave me? Like she thinks she's better than us?" "No," Graham said slowly, his smile sharpening. "She thinks she's untouchable. Big difference." He picked up the scissors, testing their weight, opening and closing the blades. The metal made a harsh shh sound that echoed in the narrow bathroom. "That girl is all talk," Graham said. "But once she feels these blades in her hair, she'll break, and she'll beg. I guarantee it." Ryder whooped. Julio grinned. Mason nodded eagerly. The plan formed quickly, precisely, cruelly. They would catch her near the east stairwell where no teachers patrolled. Julio would film. Mason would hold her in place. Graham would deliver the moment. A simple show of power, their version of fun. But then Ryder's phone buzzed. He frowned at the screen. Unknown number. The message: "Do not touch her." Ryder blinked. "Yo, what is this?" The others looked up. Julio snorted. "Probably some loser pretending to be a hero." Mason laughed. "Yeah, maybe one of the freshman simps with a crush." Graham took the phone, reading the message twice. His smirk deepened, not out of humor, but out of challenge. "Someone's scared for her," he said. "Cute." Ryder checked again. "No name, no profile, no follow-up message. Just a warning." Graham tossed the phone back to him. "Whoever sent that thinks we care about their little threat." Ryder shrugged. "Should I block it?" "No." Graham's voice lowered into a cold whisper. "Keep it. It'll be funny later." Julio grabbed his phone, opening the camera app. "So we're doing this, or what?" Graham lifted the scissors again, admiring the razor shine along the blade. "Oh, we're doing it," he said. "And she'll cry before I'm even done." The room filled with low laughter, an echo of arrogance bouncing off cold tile. But beneath all that noise, something else hung unseen in the air, a warning they didn't understand, a danger they couldn't imagine, a consequence already in motion. They had laughed off the message, unaware that the warning was real, and the price waiting for them would be far heavier than anything they were prepared to pay. The science wing of Brenton High was always quieter than the rest of the building. Long corridors lined with glass display cases, dimmer lights, and that faint chemical scent that clung to everything. It was also the one place where the cameras hadn't worked in months. Students knew it, teachers knew it, and today the bullies knew it best. Amira walked with her books clutched against her chest, heading toward biology. She moved quickly. Ever since English class, she could feel eyes following her wherever she went. Rumors traveled fast in Brenton High. Cruelty traveled faster. She turned the corner and stopped. Mason, Julio, and Ryder stood waiting, forming a wall of smirks and swagger. Amira's heartbeat steadied, not quickened. She knew this pattern too well. 3 boys, 1 hallway, no cameras, no witnesses willing to intervene. Ryder pushed himself off the wall, stepping into her path first. "Well, look who we found," he said. "Judge's daughter on her own." Julio angled his phone, recording without even pretending to hide it. Mason folded his arms, grin already twisting into something ugly. "Let's chat, Princess." Amira kept her expression calm. "I'm going to class." Mason moved faster, blocking her, leaning close enough that she felt his breath. "We asked a question," Ryder chimed in. "Your dad's a lawyer, right?" Some cheap public defender? Julio laughed. Yeah, heard he defends criminals for fun. Amira's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Not to lies, not to bait. Her silence irritated them. Bullies feared confidence, but they hated quiet strength even more. Mason stepped closer. Come on, tell us. What does Daddy do? Why'd you really transfer here? Amira tried to sidestep him. Move, Ryder shoved her back. Not hard enough to injure, but hard enough to send a message. Answer. Still, she remained silent. That's when Mason's smile faded. He grabbed her shoulder and pushed her sharply against the wall. Her books nearly fell. Her braids swung across her shoulder. The cold plaster hit her back. But she didn't cry, didn't gasp, didn't break. She simply lifted her chin and met Mason's glare with steady, unwavering eyes. Let go, she said quietly. The restraint in her voice, controlled, powerful, only fueled their frustration. You think you're better than us? Mason hissed. You think your daddy's job makes you special? Ryder added. Julio recorded all of it with a growing smile. The more tense the moment became, the more his camera stabilized, as if cruelty steadied his hands. Mason shoved her again, harder this time. Why won't you talk? Because you don't want answers, Amira replied. You want a reaction. The truth of it hung in the air like a blade. For a moment, Mason's expression faltered, because she was right, but that only made him angrier. He stepped forward, fist tightening around her shirt. Then, footsteps echoed down the hallway. All four turned their heads. A teacher, Mr. Hartley, walked into view, a stack of papers in his hands. He looked straight at them. His eyes landed on Amira pressed against the wall, on the three boys crowding her, on Julio recording. His jaw tightened. And then he looked away. He kept walking. He didn't say a word. He didn't warn them, didn't ask what was happening, didn't intervene. He pretended, deliberately, unmistakably, not to see, because standing up to Brenton's infamous Golden Boys meant trouble. And trouble with the Voss family was something teachers avoided like poison. The moment stretched into an eternity. Amira watched him walk past, feeling something deep inside her shift, not fear, but a hardening. Silence wasn't safety. Silence was complicity. Ryder exhaled a laugh. See? Nobody's coming to save you. Mason dropped his grip, but leaned in close, whispering, This school belongs to us. But even in the cornered stillness, something fierce flickered in Amira's eyes. Something they didn't recognize. Something they should have feared. That single moment of silence, the teacher's deliberate refusal to help, became the spark that would fan the coming explosion into an unstoppable blaze. The sixth period history class at Brenton High always felt heavy, rows of wooden desks, old maps peeling at the corners, and a chalkboard covered in dates no one cared to memorize. But today, the air carried a sharper edge. The lesson of the day was civil rights cases in American history, and the moment Amira walked in, she felt tension ripple through the room like static. Students sat straighter. Voices dropped, because Graham Voss was already there. He didn't look at her at first. He didn't need to. His presence alone changed the room's temperature. Ryder and Mason lounged behind him. Julio tapped his phone under the desk, ready for entertainment. Amira took her seat quietly. Mr. Dalton, the history teacher, began his lecture. Civil rights cases highlight the fight against discrimination, legal battles that changed the nation. One example is Graham's voice cut through the room like a blade. Oh, I'm sure she knows all about that. The entire class turned. Graham leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, eyes locked on Amira with a cruel, amused tilt to his smile. People like her, he added slowly, live for these stories. Probably grew up rehearsing them. A few scattered snickers. Mr. Dalton hesitated. He should have intervened, should have shut it down, but like many teachers at Brenton High, he calculated the social hierarchy and stayed quiet. Amira inhaled, not in fear, this time in control. If you're interested, she said calmly, I can explain the Reed versus Rhodes case. It shaped school desegregation law. Most people don't know how complex the ruling was. The room went silent. Graham blinked, thrown off by the absence of shame or anger. Amira continued, voice steady, articulate, and sharp. Or we could discuss the Kerner Commission report. It exposed how systemic bias fuels inequality, but you'd have to be willing to learn, not just mock. Her tone wasn't arrogant, it wasn't emotional, it was precise. And precision was something Graham wasn't used to being hit with. A few students exchanged stunned looks. One whispered, "Damn." Even Mr. Dalton paused, momentarily impressed. But Graham's pride, the thing he valued more than truth, more than logic, began to crack. He sat up straight. His jaw tightened. Color rose in his cheeks. "You think you're smart?" he said, voice dropping an octave. "You think you can talk back to me?" Amira didn't answer. Silence was her shield. That silence set him off. Graham slammed his hands on the desk, so hard the legs rattled and every student jumped. "Say something," he barked. Amira didn't flinch. "I already did." The class froze. Ryder's phone slipped from his pocket. Mason muttered, "Bro, chill." But Graham wasn't listening anymore. He stood abruptly, knocking his chair backward. The noise echoed like a gunshot. He pointed at Amira with a shaking hand. Not from fear, but from the volcanic mix of humiliation and fury bubbling inside him. "You think you're untouchable?" he snarled. "You think that hair makes you special?" He took one step closer. "Let me make it clear for you." His voice sharpened into a vicious promise. "I'm going to cut that hair, and the whole school will see you're nothing but a joke." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even the students who usually sided with Graham recoiled. Mr. Dalton whispered, "Graham, that's enough." But the damage was done. The words hung in the classroom like smoke, thick, toxic, impossible to ignore. Amira didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her stillness was louder than any shout. Graham, panting from his own rage, realized too late how far he'd gone. But pride wouldn't let him take it back. Ryder swallowed hard. Julio recorded every second. Mason avoided Graham's eyes. For the first time that day, it wasn't just Amira who felt the shift. The entire classroom felt it. A line had been crossed. A promise had been made. Words thrown out in anger often fade, but Graham's didn't. His threat became prophecy, pulling everyone closer to the violence that was already forming like a storm on the horizon. The hallway near the back exit of Brenton High always felt forgotten. A stretch of scuffed tile, humming fluorescent lights, and half-torn posters clinging to the walls. After lunch, the place emptied out completely. No teachers passed through, no students lingered. It was the perfect stage for something cruel, and Graham Voss knew it. He stood in the shadowed corridor, fingers wrapped around the handle of the industrial scissors Mason had stolen. The cold metal pressed against his palm, grounding him in a twisted way. His threat in the history classroom still echoed in his skull. Sharp, humiliating, unforgettable. He had to follow through now. He had to prove something. To Amira, to the school, to himself. Mason leaned beside him, phone already raised, camera rolling smoothly. "Lighting's good here," he said. "We'll get her reaction from the front. Crying, screaming, whatever. It'll be perfect." Julio positioned himself at the far end of the hallway, pretending to scroll on his phone, but his eyes darted back and forth, waiting for movement. He was the lookout. Ryder paced near the exit door, cracking his knuckles. "No way she slips past us. Soon as she comes around that corner, boom, we grab her." Graham exhaled, jaw tight. He wasn't smiling anymore. Anger simmered beneath his skin, but something else stirred too. Anticipation, the kind that fed his ego. He opened the scissors slightly. Shh! The sound echoed in the empty hall like a warning bell. "Relax," Mason said. "We'll get it done fast." In and out, Graham nodded, though his pulse thrummed sharper than before. Then his phone buzzed. He frowned, pulling it out. New message from Dad. He opened it and froze. "Do not cause any trouble today. I mean it." Graham stared at the words. His father never texted warnings without reason. The Voss family name carried weight, power, influence. And any scandal, even small, was unacceptable. Mason peeked over. Trouble? What's that about? Graham hesitated. His jaw twitched, and then, with a scoff, he hit delete. It's nothing, he said. He doesn't know what we're doing. Ryder raised an eyebrow. You sure? Please, Graham muttered. We're messing with a girl's hair, not robbing a bank. Mason laughed. Exactly. Worst case, she cries. Best case, the whole school laughs, Julio added. And we get views for days. The scissors glinted under the fluorescent light. Graham rolled his shoulders, forcing away the small, annoying spark of unease. His father's warning couldn't be about this. It was too minor, too trivial. No one would care. No one would believe some new girl over the Voss air anyway. He looked at his crew, each one in place, each one waiting for him. No backing out, Graham said. His voice was low, firm, final. Ryder smirked. We're ready. Julio slipped his phone into recording mode. Mason steadied the frame. Everything was set. The trap was ready to spring. And then, footsteps, light, steady, familiar. Amira Cole turned the corner, books in her arms, completely unaware of the four shadows waiting for her like wolves behind tall grass. Graham's grip on the scissors tightened. This is it, Mason whispered. Julio signaled. Target incoming. Ryder blocked the far end of the hallway. She's not running anywhere. The air thickened, the moment sharpened, a heartbeat before impact. But none of the boys realized they were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed, that this wasn't a prank or a joke or a harmless moment to brag about later. This was the first irreversible step toward a collapse none of them saw coming. Not one of them understood that in just 60 seconds, their lives would twist in a direction they could never escape. The hallway forked into a narrow bend where sunlight poured through a tall glass door, casting a warm beam across the floor. Bright, peaceful, utterly out of place for what was about to happen. Amira stepped into the light. She didn't even have time to breathe before a hand shot out of the shadows. Graham's hand. His fingers twisted violently into her braids, yanking her backward with such force that her books flew from her arms. The world tilted. Her knees hit the floor. Pain burst along her scalp. A gasp escaped her. Sharp, involuntary. Mason was already there, crouching in front of her, his phone inches from her face. The red recording light blinked with each tremble of her breath. Look at the camera, Mason taunted. Give us something good. Julio positioned himself behind Graham, capturing another angle. Ryder blocked the hallway exit like a guard dog, arms crossed, grin wide. Graham pulled harder, lifting her head by her hair. His voice came out low and venomous. I told you this would happen. Amira's breath shook. Not from fear. Fear she could have handled. This was different. This was humiliation, the kind that tried to crush your very spirit. Her fingers dug into the floor as she fought to stay grounded, to keep herself from breaking in front of them. Graham leaned closer, the metallic shine of the scissors catching the sunlight. You should smile, he hissed. This is the only attention you're getting today. Then, louder, echoing through the hall like a command, smile. He raised the scissors high. Mason zoomed in. Julio steadied his frame. Ryder laughed under his breath. It was a perfect storm of cruelty, tight, inescapable, vicious. And then the world changed. The back door behind them didn't open. It erupted, a violent burst of motion, a shock wave of air. The metal bar slammed against the wall with a sound like thunder. Every head jerked toward the door. And standing there, silhouetted against the sunlight, framed in black cloth that seemed to devour the light around him, was a figure none of them recognized. But Amira did. Judge Marcus Cole, her father, not in his usual work suit, but in his full judicial robe, heavy, imposing, unmistakable. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to see this, but fate had dragged him into the exact place, at the exact second. The universe dared to harm his daughter. The hallway froze. Graham's grip loosened, not out of compassion, but out of sudden, instinctive fear. His eyes widened. His breath caught. Even Ryder backed up a step. Julio lowered his phone. Mason's grin vanished entirely. Marcus didn't shout, didn't rush forward. He just stood there, silent, still, a storm wearing a judge's robe. His eyes, cold, razor-sharp, fell on the scissors in Graham's hand, on the fist tangled in Amira's hair, on her knees pressed to the floor. And something ancient and terrifying flickered across his expression. Not fury, not panic, but judgment, the kind that ended careers, ended reputations, ended families. Let her go. Each word landed like a stone dropped into an ocean, calm, heavy, unstoppable. Graham stumbled back, releasing her instantly. The scissors slipped from his hand, clattering across the floor. Amira scrambled into her father's arms, her breath trembling. Marcus wrapped a steady arm around her shoulder, shielding her from the boys like a wall no force could break. Ryder swallowed hard. Mason hid his phone. Julio's hand shook, because they finally understood this wasn't a prank. This wasn't a hallway game. This was a crime witnessed by the last man they should ever have crossed. Judge Marcus Cole took one step forward, and the air thickened to the point of suffocation. And in that single step, the balance of power in Brenton High flipped permanently, violently, and far beyond anything the bullies had imagined. The hallway had never been so silent, not during exams, not during fire drills, not even during lockdown alerts. This silence was different, alive, electric, suffocating. It wrapped around every student who stood frozen in place, eyes wide, breath caught, as Judge Marcus Cole stepped fully into the corridor. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He moved with a terrifying precision, each step deliberate, controlled, lethal in its calmness. He reached Amira first. She was on one knee, shaking from shock rather than fear, her braids scattered across the floor like fallen ropes. Marcus crouched immediately, one arm slipping around her shoulders, drawing her gently but firmly to her feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, not loudly, not urgently, but with a quiet intensity that sent a ripple of dread through everyone listening. Amira shook her head, though tears glimmered in her lashes. Marcus brushed a braid from her cheek with a touch so soft it contrasted violently with the cold rage tightening his jaw. Then he stood, and the temperature in the hallway dropped like a stone. He turned toward Graham, and in that moment the boy who once ruled Brenton High looked impossibly small. The scissors were still on the ground near Graham's feet. His hand had gone limp the second Marcus appeared, the metal clattering onto tile like a guilty confession. Marcus didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. When he spoke, the air vibrated as if the walls recognized authority older and heavier than anything they'd ever held. "You assaulted my daughter." Each word was measured, precise, deadly. Graham stumbled backward. "Sir, it was just... I didn't..." Marcus stepped closer. The hallway collectively inhaled. "You touched her," he said, voice low, resonant. "You dragged her by her hair. You lifted a weapon against her. And you intended to harm her further." Ryder shifted uneasily. Mason wiped sweat from his forehead. Julio lowered his phone so fast the camera blurred. The students surrounding them, dozens now, stood perfectly still, eyes darting between the trembling bullies and the immovable man in the black judicial robe. For the first time, someone had stripped away the shield that protected Graham Voss his entire life. Fear bloomed in his eyes. Marcus wasn't done. He raised his chin slightly, surveying the crowd with the poise of someone used to controlling rooms 10 times larger than this one. "Every student here," he said, "will remain where they are." A murmur of confusion fluttered through the hallway. Marcus continued, unwavering. "You are all now witnesses." A collective gasp rippled outward. Graham's jaw dropped. "Witnesses? What? Why?" Marcus didn't look at him. He pulled his phone from his robe pocket with the efficiency of a man who had done this many times before, and dialed. The ringing echoed. Once, twice. Then a voice answered, "This is Judge Marcus Cole. I am reporting an assault on a minor. Send officers to Brenton High School immediately." The hallway ignited with whispers, shock, fear, disbelief. Ryder paled. Mason's mouth hung open. Julio took an involuntary step back, as though distance alone could undo what had already been set in stone. Marcus ended the call and slid the phone back into his robe. His gaze returned to the boys, cold, unwavering, judicial. "You will stand exactly where you are until law enforcement arrives. If you move, if you speak, if you attempt to tamper with evidence," he paused. His voice dropped to a level that made even the lights seem to flicker. "You will face additional charges." No one doubted him, not for a moment. Behind Marcus, Amira clung to his sleeve, not in fear but in grounding. His presence wrapped around her like armor, unshakable and absolute. Graham swallowed hard. "Mr. Cole, please." "I didn't mean—" "You meant every moment," Marcus replied. "And now you will answer for it." The hallway darkened around his silhouette, his robe billowing slightly with his breath. He wasn't just a father. He wasn't just a judge. He was judgment incarnate. And this was only the beginning, because Marcus Cole was not merely a parent protecting his child. He was the nightmare that hunted men who believed power gave them permission to be cruel. The air inside Principal Wallace's office felt heavy, thick enough to choke on. The blinds were half drawn, casting narrow stripes of shadow across the carpet. Every person in the room sat in a different kind of fear. Principal Wallace stood behind his desk, hands trembling against a stack of papers he hadn't actually read. His forced smile flickered like a faulty light bulb. This is obviously a misunderstanding," he stammered. "Kids misread situations. Emotions run high. We should all take a breath. Stop." Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade. He didn't raise it. He didn't need to. The federal judge sat with his back straight, Amira beside him, calm now, but still pale. The robe draped over Marcus's shoulders made him look even larger in the cramped space, an immovable object no one could ignore. Across from them sat the parents of the Bullies, Mr. and Mrs. Voss, front and center, faces red with a mix of arrogance and panic. Mason's mother fidgeted with her bracelet. Julio's father stared at the floor. Ryder's stepfather crossed his arms defensively. Mr. Voss cleared his throat. "Judge Cole, surely we can agree this was just, well, boys being boys. A prank gone too far." Marcus looked at him slowly, as if studying a specimen he couldn't quite believe existed. "A prank?" he repeated. "A prank involves humor. This was an assault, a targeted act against my daughter. And your son was the one holding the weapon." Mrs. Voss jumped in, voice shaking. "He didn't mean to hurt her." "Intention is irrelevant under federal law," Marcus said sharply. "Impact is what matters." Principal Wallace swallowed so loudly it echoed. Mr. Voss bristled, desperate to regain control. "Judge Cole, be reasonable. Calling the police was excessive. We should have handled this in-house." Marcus leaned forward. His gaze locked onto Wallace. "In-house," he said, "is exactly where the problem began." Then he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. Dozens of pages, tabs, highlighted sections, official seals. He dropped it onto Wallace's desk with a heavy thud that made everyone jump. "These," Marcus said, "are prior complaints filed by students of color against your school. 12 documented incidents in 2 years. 12. Wallace's face drained of color. Mrs. Voss whispered, "This can't be happening." Marcus continued, voice steady and merciless. "Every one of these reports was dismissed, ignored, buried. Patterns of discrimination this blatant are not accidents. They are systemic failures." Julio's father raised a hand weakly. "Judge Cole, please. Surely you're not saying—" "I am," Marcus said. And I've already filed a request for a federal civil rights investigation into Brenton High." The room exploded into panic. "What? You can't. This is overkill. Our children's futures." Marcus stood, and the room fell silent again. "I gave your school the chance to correct itself," he said. "But silence became complicity. Today, that ends." He placed one final document on the desk. "Signed, stamped, unquestionable. No one in this room," he added, "will walk away from this unchanged." Principal Wallace slumped into his chair, defeated. Mr. Voss's hands shook. No one argued now. No one dared, and from that moment forward, Brenton High was no longer simply a school. It became the center of a storm that would rewrite its history forever. The conference room at Brenton High was never meant to hold this much tension. Its long wooden table, polished to a dull shine, reflected the harsh glow of fluorescent lights. Thick blinds blocked the afternoon sun. The atmosphere felt clinical, sterile, yet the air buzzed with something far from clean. Judge Marcus Cole sat at the head of the table, robe still draped over his shoulders, presence so commanding that even the walls seemed to lean away from him. Beside him sat Amira, quiet but alert. Across the table, Principal Wallace wrung his hands until his knuckles blanched. To Marcus's left, the district's attorney shifted nervously through a folder of legal notes. To the right sat the school resource officer, arms crossed, jaw tight. The bullies, Graham, Mason, Julio, and Ryder, sat huddled together, pale and fidgeting. And at the far end of the room sat Miss Langford, trembling, her eyes red. Marcus began without ceremony. "I want every hallway camera from this morning pulled up. From 7:30 a.m. to noon." Wallace hesitated. "Some of the footage may be unclear. The cameras are old and—" "Play them," Marcus ordered. The officer nodded and pressed a key. The screens flickered to life. Scene after scene unfolded, Amira walking alone, Ryder and Mason whispering behind her, Graham blocking her path in the second-floor hallway, Julio recording. Then, the moment where Graham grabbed her braid, students in the room gasped. The bullies looked at the table, shame mixing with fear. Then came the science wing hallway. The footage was darker, grainier, but still visible. Ryder shoving Amira, Mason pinning her to the wall, Julio filming every second. Principal Wallace leaned forward, seizing the opportunity. "That camera is old," he insisted. "The footage is too blurry. We can't assume intent." Marcus didn't blink. "Zoom. Slow to 0.25 speed." Wallace swallowed. "Judge Cole, that's unnecessary. I don't think—" "I do not require your assessment," Marcus said coolly. "Run the footage." The officer complied, and suddenly everything was clear, painfully, undeniably clear. Amira's face twisted in discomfort, Mason's hand fisted in her shirt, Ryder's shove, Julio's smirk, and then the detail the entire room froze at, Miss Langford walking by, turning her head, seeing, then looking away, accelerating her pace. A silence so sharp it rang filled the room. Miss Langford broke first. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I was scared. You don't understand. The Voss family. They control everything here. If I said anything, I'd lose my job." Marcus stared at her, not with hatred, but with a chilling disappointment. "You chose your job over a child's safety." Wallace jumped in, desperate. "This is being taken out of context." Marcus's hand slammed a thick file onto the table. Everyone jolted. "These," he said, "are the discrimination complaints filed against your school in the past 2 years." He flipped the folder open. 12 reports, 12 signatures, 12 stories ignored, all dismissed by you, Principal Wallace. Marcus continued, voice like iron, "all marked as insufficient evidence, yet the footage shows a pattern, not just of bullying, but of staff negligence and administrative cover-up." Wallace's face collapsed into panic. The attorney inhaled sharply. The officer shook his head, disgusted. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a system, a machine of silence, a culture of protection for the powerful. Marcus straightened, eyes sweeping the room like a judge surveying a courtroom. "And now that the truth is exposed," he said, "it is time for accountability, not just for children acting cruelly, but for the adults who allowed them to believe they could." And as the weight of those words settled over the room, Marcus knew judgment was no longer simply about punishing a handful of boys, but dismantling the entire structure that enabled them. The district boardroom felt more like a courtroom than an administrative space. Rows of rigid chairs, a long oak table polished to a mirror sheen, microphones ready for public record, and reporters lining the back wall with cameras poised. The muffled hum of whispers filled the air as parents, staff, and board members shuffled into their seats. At the center of it all stood Judge Marcus Cole, calm, composed, wrapped in the unmistakable authority of a man who had spent decades shaping the law. He placed a thick file on the table before the school board. "This is not a prank," he began. "This is a documented assault on my daughter, and every piece of evidence confirms it." At the opposite end sat Mr. Voss, Graham's father, designer suit immaculate, expression tight with forced confidence. He gave a stiff wave to a local reporter as if the cameras existed for him alone. "Judge Cole," he said loudly, "let's be rational. Boys make mistakes. One moment of misjudgment shouldn't destroy a promising young man's future." Marcus didn't blink. "Attempting to cut a girl's hair while she screams on the floor is not a misjudgment. It is an act of violence." Gasps fluttered through the room. Mrs. Trent, Mason's mother, dabbed her eyes. Julio's father stared at the table, ashamed. Ryder's stepfather shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Voss scoffed. "You're exaggerating for effect." Marcus opened the file and slid a tablet forward. "Play the footage." The lights dimmed. The screen flickered on, and the room watched, horrified, as Graham yanked Amira's braid so hard her knees buckled. They heard her cry out. They saw the tears in her eyes. They saw Mason's camera shoved into her face. They saw the glint of the scissors. They saw the moment Graham lifted them high, shouting, "Smile!" But the moment that truly crushed the room, a long, thick braid hitting the floor, a sound so small, so soft, yet it felt like thunder. The boardroom froze. No one whispered. No one breathed. Even the reporters lowered their cameras, not for professionalism, but because they felt guilty capturing such raw cruelty. Mr. Voss's confident smirk cracked, then crumbled, because at the end of the video, next to Amira's fallen braid, stood a man he finally recognized, Judge Marcus Cole, the federal judge known for landmark civil rights rulings, a man whose signature could end careers, institutions, and generational power. Mr. Voss swallowed hard. You're that Marcus Cole," he muttered, voice trembling despite his attempt to hide it. Marcus nodded once. "I am." A tremor passed through the room. He then stood, addressing the board with unwavering resolve. "Given the severity of the assault and the apparent racial motivation," he said, "I am formally requesting the following actions: a juvenile assault record for Graham Voss, mandatory rehabilitation and community service for all involved students, financial restitution for the emotional trauma my daughter suffered, and a full federal investigation into Brenton High's administrative practices and history of discriminatory neglect." Mrs. Voss burst into tears. Mason's mother covered her mouth. Julio's father slumped back, defeated. Principal Wallace looked ready to collapse. No one argued. No one dared. The board members exchanged terrified glances because they understood the truth. This was no longer about a school incident. This was a reckoning. Marcus gathered his papers. "But the true verdict," he said quietly, "won't be decided in this room." He turned toward the door. "It will be decided where this began. Inside the hallways, your school allowed to become a hunting ground." And as the boardroom fell into stunned silence, Marcus knew the real confrontation still awaited, back at the place where everything had started. 1 week later, The courtyard of Brenton High looked nothing like the school Amira had walked into on her first day. A large stage had been erected beneath the flagpole, microphones lined across its front, and rows of chairs filled with teachers, students, parents, and local reporters. Cameras flashed. News vans crowded the parking lot. The entire town seemed to be watching, because today was not just a meeting. It was a public reckoning. Judge Marcus Cole stood at the center of the stage, his presence commanding absolute silence. On one side sat the district school board, on the other, Principal Wallace, pale and trembling, clutching a folder like a life preserver no one intended to throw him. Students filled every corner of the courtyard, standing on benches, leaning on railings, pressed shoulder to shoulder. No one whispered, no one laughed. The weight of what happened and what was coming hung in the air like a storm about to break. The meeting opened with testimonies. One by one, students of color stepped forward, sharing stories of discrimination that had been ignored or dismissed for years. A Latina girl described being punished for dress code violations, while white students wore the same outfits. A freshman boy recounted being searched for looking suspicious. A black senior spoke about being called slurs in the hallway with no consequences. Parents wiped their eyes. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. Then a group of teachers stepped forward. Ms. Langford spoke first, voice trembling. Principal Wallace often told us not to challenge certain students, not to cause trouble with wealthy families. I regret staying silent. More teachers echoed her words. The courtyard buzzed with shock and shame. Marcus stepped to the microphone, his voice carried effortlessly over the crowd. Brenton High, he began, will become a model for justice, or it will not exist at all. The statement struck like lightning. Gasps rippled outward. He continued, "For years, your administration has allowed harassment to thrive. For years, you dismissed voices that deserved to be heard. And for years, you chose silence over accountability. That ends today." He opened a file and read aloud the board's decision. Effective immediately, Principal Wallace is removed from his position. A reporter shouted a question. Cameras clicked. Students whispered urgently, but Marcus wasn't finished. A new zero-tolerance bullying policy will be implemented, enforced, documented, and reviewed by federal oversight. The UI ban Haku stepped forward to announce funding. Brenton High will receive a new diversity and anti-racism program, scholarships for marginalized students, and mandatory staff retraining. Cheers broke out across the courtyard, hopeful, hesitant, but real, and then the unexpected happened. A group of students, ones who had stayed silent the day Amira was attacked, walked to the stage. Their expressions were solemn. A tall boy spoke into the microphone. "We should have defended her," he said. "We saw things. We ignored them. We're sorry, Amira," another girl added. "We want to stand with you now," the crowd murmured. Soft, emotional, supportive. Amira, standing beside her father, felt her breath catch. For the first time since arriving at Brenton High, she didn't feel alone. She felt seen. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. The community was changing. Slowly, painfully, but undeniably. Yet even as justice began to take shape, Amira knew her heart still carried wounds no policy could heal. Not yet. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet, the kind of silence that wrapped around the walls and made every breath feel heavier. Amira sat at her bedroom vanity, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating the strands of her damaged braids. Some were frayed, some uneven. Some cut so abruptly they still held the sting of Graham's grip. She lifted the scissors slowly. Her reflection stared back at her, a girl who had endured humiliation, fear, and a storm she never asked for. She gathered the ruined braids in her hands, took a shaky breath, and snipped. The sound was soft, almost gentle, but the feeling, sharp, brutal, cut deeper than the scissors ever could. She placed the severed braids on the vanity, They lay there like pieces of a memory she couldn't decide whether to keep or destroy. Amira looked into the mirror. Her eyes glistened. Her lips trembled. I don't look like myself anymore," she whispered. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his silhouette steady and grounding. She turned toward him, voice cracking. "Dad, I'm scared to go outside. Everyone will see. They'll stare. They'll know what happened." Marcus crossed the room and crouched beside her, taking her hands gently into his. "Do you know," he began softly, "your mother went through something very similar when she was your age?" Amira blinked, startled. "She did?" "She was targeted," Marcus continued, "because of how she wore her hair, because it was full, proud, and different. Someone tried to make her feel small, but she refused to let them decide her worth." Amira's breath steadied as he spoke. "Your mother," Marcus said, squeezing her hand, "turned her pain into power, into voice, into purpose. And you, my daughter, you have that same fire." A tear finally slid down Amira's cheek, but it wasn't from fear this time. It was release. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, and for the first time since the attack, she allowed herself to collapse into his embrace, not in weakness, but in healing. The next day, Amira joined the new art therapy program Brenton High had launched in response to the investigation. The classroom smelled of acrylic paint and fresh paper, a strangely calming scent. Other students sat quietly at their easels, processing their own versions of pain. The counselor approached Amira with warm eyes. "You can draw anything," she said. "Anything that helps you breathe again." Amira picked up a pencil. At first, her hand trembled. Lines came out, jagged, uneven. But slowly, shapes began to form. She drew the braid that had been cut, the moment frozen in time. But then, instead of shading it in darkness, she lifted a brush and painted radiant streaks of gold, blue, and white exploding from around it. Light, not loss. Strength, not shame. When she finished, she stared at her work. It was honest. It was painful, and somehow it was beautiful. For the first time in days, she smiled, small but real. Plot twist number 9 settled quietly into her heart. She reached into her backpack, removed the severed braid she had saved, and placed it gently in a small wooden box. This wasn't a trophy of humiliation. It was a marker of transformation, the last piece of who she used to be, and the first piece of who she was becoming. She closed the box with steady hands. And then came the day that mattered most, the day everything would come full circle, and Amira would rise stronger than anyone expected. The sun hung high over Brenton High's courtyard, casting warm light across a stage decorated with banners reading "Courage Day," honoring voices that rose above silence. Students, teachers, and parents filled the courtyard, standing shoulder to shoulder. The tension the school once carried had transformed into anticipation, hopeful, humbled, changed. At the center of the front row stood Judge Marcus Cole, hands folded behind his back, eyes steady with pride, and beside him, wearing a soft blue ribbon in her newly trimmed hair, stood Amira. Today was not about punishment. Today was about power, the kind that grows from truth and resilience. The principal's replacement stepped up to the microphone. "Today," she announced, "we recognize those who showed courage not by fighting back with violence, but by standing in truth. Today, we honor Amira Cole." Applause rose, warm and steady. Amira stepped onto the stage. Her heart pounded once, hard, but then settled. She scanned the crowd. Students who once stared at her with judgment now watched with something closer to respect. Teachers who had long stayed silent now stood with their hands clasped, remorseful. She spoke clearly. "I came to Brenton High hoping to blend in," she began. "But sometimes life doesn't let us stay invisible." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. "What happened to me was painful, physically and emotionally. But this isn't just my story. It's the story of every student who has been hurt, ignored, or silenced." Her voice did not shake. It flowed, calm, grounded, strong. "I don't want revenge. I want change, real change. And I'm grateful to everyone who stood up to make this school safer for every student who comes after me." The courtyard was silent, completely, reverently silent. Then came the moment no one had been waiting for, but everyone knew had to happen. The vice principal called, "Graham Voss, please come to the stage." A ripple of whispers spread. Students craned their necks. Cameras lifted. Graham stepped forward. His swagger was gone. His confident smirk erased. His eyes were swollen, red. He climbed the steps as though each one weighed 100 pounds. When he reached the microphone, his hands shook visibly. He swallowed. The courtyard waited. "I was wrong," he finally said, voice cracking. "I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I thought I was proving something." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I wasn't proving anything. I was ruining myself." He looked at Amira, not defiantly, not apologetically, but with genuine remorse. "I wish I never touched your hair," he whispered, "because when I did, I destroyed my own future." A heavy silence hung over the crowd. Even the air seemed to hold still. Then came the final twist. Amira stepped forward. She didn't yell. She didn't turn away. Instead, she removed the blue ribbon from her hair, the one she'd worn since her healing began. She held it for a long moment in her palm, then gently placed it into Graham's trembling hand. Her voice was soft, but it carried across every corner of the courtyard. "This isn't forgiveness," she said. "It's a reminder. Someone else's pain is never your joke." Graham broke, shoulders shaking, tears falling freely. And then the entire courtyard rose, one by one, row by row. A standing ovation erupted. Thunderous, emotional, overwhelming, not for Graham, for Amira, for her strength, her grace, her refusal to let cruelty define her. Marcus watched from the front row, a quiet pride glowing in his eyes. He had fought the battle, but it was his daughter who changed the landscape. And that was how a new girl, armed with courage, justice, and a father's unshakable love, transformed Brenton High forever. And just like that, the girl they thought they could break became the reason an entire school finally faced the truth. Amira didn't just get justice. She changed the system, exposed the cowards, and walked away stronger than anyone expected. But now, I want to hear from you. What moment in this story shocked you the most? Your voice matters here, so drop your thoughts in the comments. And if this story kept you watching to the end, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. There are many more stories that will leave you speechless.